بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. رمضان مبارك عليكم جميعا إن شاء الله. Okay, we're still in the audiolingual method, and today we are going to talk about thinking about the experience, and we'll start with the observation and what are the principles that we can get from each one of these observations. The teacher introduces a new dialogue. Okay, language form denote occur by themselves. They occur most naturally within a context. So it's important that the teacher present a dialogue because language occur in a context. The second point, the language teacher uses only the target language in the classroom. Also, the teacher maybe use or always use actions, pictures, or realia are used to give meaning otherwise. The native language and the target language have separate linguistic systems. So to avoid the interference between these two languages, they should be kept apart. So the teacher will not use the native language, they use the target language and sometimes use action, pictures, or realia to make the meaning clear for the students. Number 3, the teacher or the language teacher introduces the dialogue by modeling it 2 times and also modeling the correct answer when they work on roles. The teacher also correct mispronunciation by modeling the proper sound. One of the most important tasks of the teacher, of language teacher major roles, is that a model of the target language for his students or for her students. And this model should be an accurate model, okay? And the students should be able to mimic the model. So the teacher, one of the important role of the teacher is a model for his students. And the teacher always provide the correct model for the students when they work on roles, when they start a dialogue, when there is mispronunciation, so the teacher should remodel the phrase or the sentence or the word. These students repeat each line of the new dialogue several times. Why repetition? Because repetition is important for students to form a habit. So language learning is a process of habit formation. When they repeat more and more several times, they will form a habit in the target language. Number 5, the students stumble over one of the lines of the dialogue and the teacher uses a backward build-up drill. It's important to prevent learners from making errors. Why? Because when they continue making errors, they will form bad habits. Okay? And the errors, when they occur, they should immediately be corrected by the teacher. So the teacher used this type of drill, backward build-up drill, to help students to overcome the habit of their native language and to avoid making errors when they stumble over a long line in the dialogue. Number 6, the teacher initiates a chain drill in which each student greets another. The purpose of language learning is to learn how to communicate in the target language. And you remember we have explained that in the chain drill, that the teacher chain drill, it's important for both, for the teacher and for the students. For the teacher to observe, to see how the students use the target language, and also for the students to practice the target language, to use what they have learned. Number 7, the teacher uses single slot and multiple slot substitutions. It's important, or they are important exercise to be used in this method. In order to create new sentences, students must learn which part of the speech occupies which slot. Students should know the structure of the sentence, where the subject, where the place of the subject, the verb and the complement, and these things the correct structure of the sentence, to be able to form or to create new sentences. Number 8, the teacher says, very good. Okay? Very good job. These things are very important, or these phrases are very important for teacher to use them to what, as they can see, they can be considered as positive reinforcement, help the students to develop correct habits. So I encourage you to use these words when you became teachers, inshallah. The teacher uses spoken cues and picture cues. Okay, students should learn to respond to both verbal and non-verbal stimuli. They should be able to answer when they have only picture, when they have words, when the teacher, for example, asks them a question, so they have to be able to respond to both verbal and non-verbal stimuli. Number 10, the teacher conducts transformation drills. Each language has a finite number of patterns, and pattern practice helps students to form habits which enable the students to use the language patterns. So transformation also helps students to know what are the form, what are the different form of the language, because each language have or has a finite number of patterns. Number 11, when the students can handle it, the teacher poses the question to them rapidly. When it's easy for students to learn, when it is easy for students to pronounce, to read, or to produce language correctly, so students should overlearn. Learn to answer automatically without stopping. They should overlearn, repeat many times to be able to answer automatically without stopping. The teacher provides the students with cues. She calls on individuals, she smiles encouragement, she holds up picture one after another. The teacher should be like what an orchestra leader. This is another important role for the teacher. Okay, to be an orchestra leader. That means to conducting, guiding, and controlling the students' behavior in the class, in the target language class. Okay, so he is an orchestra leader for his students. Provide cues and help students to learn the patterns and structure and the vocabularies of the target language. So he is or she is an orchestra leader. That means to conduct, guide, control the class. New vocabularies or new vocabulary is introduced through lines of the dialogue. Vocabulary is limited. The major objective of language teaching should be for students to acquire the structural pattern. What is important here? To know what's the structure or the correct sentence. How to start, how to produce a correct sentence. Okay, there is little or very few new vocabularies. Students will learn vocabulary afterward. Okay, so the most important thing is to learn the structural pattern of the target language. Students are given no grammar rules. So as we explained in the direct method, and here in this method we also should focus on that grammar rule these students will figure out from the text. There is no an explicit explanation of a grammar rule. The learning of another language should be the same as the acquisition of the native language. We don't memorize the grammar of our native language when we speak Arabic, so we don't need to memorize. When the small children start speaking, they don't memorize grammar rules of the Arabic to be able to speak or to produce the language. So the learning of another language should be the same as the acquisition of the native language. 15, the teacher does a contrastive analysis of the target language and the student's native language. Why this comparison or contrastive study or analysis between these two languages? The major challenge of language teaching is getting students to overcome what? The habits of their native language. This contrastive analysis will help the teacher to figure out, to understand where to focus, where students need more practice. Okay. 16, the teacher writes the dialogue on the blackboard. Okay, the students do some limited written work with the dialogue and the sentence drill. This method is focused on what speak is more basic. Focus on speaking to develop the student's ability in producing and communicating in the target language. So speech is more basic to language than the written form. And the natural order is what in this method? Listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Okay. Number 17, the supermarket alphabet game and a discussion of American supermarket and football are included. Language cannot be separated from culture. Culture is part from the language. Culture is not only literature and fine art, but also the everyday behavior of the people who use the target language, and one of the teacher's important responsibilities to present information about the culture. The culture may be contextualized within the text, or the teacher provide information about the culture. Okay, now we come to the second part of our lecture today, reviewing the principles. Okay, question number 1, what is the goal of the teacher who use the audiolingual method? The teacher wants their students to be able to communicate or to use the target language communicatively. Number 1, the teacher believes that students need to what? To overlearn, to repeat several times, to overlearn the target language, to be able to what? To use the language automatically without stopping. And the students achieve this by what? By forming new habits in the target language and overcoming the habits of their native language. So here we have these 3 points. Students should be able to, the teacher wants their students to communicate in the target language, and they should overlearn the target language, and they can do that by forming new habits. Okay. Question number 2, what's the role of the teacher? What is the role of the students? The teacher, as we said, is orchestral leader for the students to be able to direct, control the language behavior of her students. Orchestral leader. Second, the teacher is what? The teacher is a model. He always model the dialogue for their students, model the drills for the students, and model the pronunciation for the students. So the teacher is a model for the students. And the students are what? Students are imitators of the teacher model. The teacher models, and they follow the teacher directions and respond as accurately as possible, and as accurately and as rapidly as possible. Question number 3, what are some characteristics of the audiolingual method of teacher learning in this process, or in this method? New vocabulary and structural patterns are presented through dialogue. Okay, so vocabularies and structural pattern or grammatical structure presented through dialogues. The dialogues are learned through imitation and repetition. Drills. There is so many drills in this method: repetition, backward build-up drill, chain drills, substitution, single slot substitution, multiple slot substitution, transformation drill, and so on. So it's based on drills. I mean the learning process based on drills or drilling. Students' successful response are positively reinforced by, for example, the teacher saying good, very good, good job, excellent, and so on. Explicit grammar rules are not provided. A grammar rule is taught inductively. There is no explicit explanation of a grammar in this method. Cultural information are contextualized in the dialogue or presented by the teacher. So these are the characteristics of learning process method, teaching process in the audiolingual method. Number 4, what is the nature of students' teaching interaction? What is the nature of students' interaction? There is students interaction, and this type of interaction is initiated by the teacher and controlled or directed by the teacher. Okay, but the most important interaction is teacher and students, or teacher-students interaction. Number 6, how is language viewed? How is culture viewed? The view of language in the audiolingual method has been influenced by descriptive linguists. Every language is seen as having its own unique system. I mean, the target language and the native language should be should be kept separate from each other to avoid what intervention between them or interference between them. Okay, everyday speech is emphasized. It's important that students develop communication in the target language to be able to communicate naturally and automatically without stopping. Culture consists of the everyday behavior and lifestyle of the target language speakers. Okay, so here in this method, languages should be kept apart. I mean, native language and target language. And everyday speech communication is more emphasized in this method, and culture consists of the everyday behavior and lifestyle of the target language speakers. Number 7, what areas of language are emphasized? What language skills are emphasized? Vocabulary and sound system and grammatical pattern. Vocabulary is kept to minimum. I mean, there's just few new vocabularies in the dialogues, but students have to master what? The sound system, pronunciation, correct pronunciation, and grammatical patterns. The natural order of skills is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So speaking is most students will listen and then they speak, because communicating, as we said, communicating is more important than written language. The oral skills receive most of the attention. That means listening and speaking. What students write, they have first been introduced to orally. When the teacher asks students to write something, so they have practiced it orally before. Okay, for example, the teacher asks them to write a dialogue. They have practiced the dialogue, they have read the dialogue, and they have practiced different drills on the dialogue. And then they come to the teacher, ask them to write, or to, for example, to fill in the blank for some missing words from the dialogue. Pronunciation is taught from the beginning. Pronunciation is important together, as we said, with the grammatical patterns, because they will communicate, and they should communicate correctly. Their pronunciation should be correct and accurate. What's the role of the students' native language? Native language is not allowed. Native language is not allowed, and we said, as we have said before, native language and target language should be kept apart from each other to avoid interference. Only the target language is allowed in the class, and we explained that a contrastive analysis between the students' native language and target language will reveal where the teacher should emphasize, where students need more practice to avoid intervention or to avoid difficulties. Number 9, how is evaluation is accomplished? Students might be asked to distinguish between words in a minimal pairs, or to supply an appropriate verb form in a sentence. This type of evaluation. Each question on the test would focus on only one point of the language at a time. How does the teacher respond to students' error? Students' errors are to be avoided from the beginning, okay, as if at all possible. So they should be eradicated. They should be avoided from the beginning, and this is the responsibility of the teacher to correct the mistakes and to help students to overcome all the difficulties and to produce the language correctly. Okay, thank you, and hope you all the best.